On the morning of April 18, 1943, the sunlight stretches across the Solomon Islands, illuminating the tranquil green-blue expanse of the South Pacific. In less than 20 minutes, the Imperial Japanese Navy would endure one of its most severe losses of personnel in the Pacific War. 6 of Japan's most skilled Zero fighter pilots, carefully selected for this high-profile mission, were about to confront an operational disaster that would resonate through the annals of Japanese naval aviation. Their objective was straightforward: provide air cover for the most important figure in Japan's naval hierarchy. Yet, in the coming moments, a chain of errors, limitations, and unforeseen variables would culminate in failure. This account is not merely a tale of an ambush. It is an exploration into why a group of elite aviators, operating the premier fighter of the Pacific Theater, could not protect the one man whose survival outweighed any island, any fleet, or any tactical victory. Historians continue to debate this event, and the question that persists appears simple but conceals profound complexity. How did 6 highly trained Zero pilots, positioned defensively and selected for their expertise, fail to prevent the downing of 2 American bombers in clear daylight? The answer requires examining a convergence of technological shortcomings, flawed strategic assumptions, and misjudgments that together determine the fate of Japan's top naval commander. Every facet of this operation, from aircraft performance specifications to split-second tactical decisions, played a role in the outcome. While most historical accounts highlight Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's death as a remarkable success for American intelligence and operational planning, less attention has been paid to the Japanese side. The 6 pilots involved have often been reduced to mere footnotes, portrayed as anonymous escorts who failed, yet these men were far from ordinary. They were veterans of the 204th Naval Air Group, survivors of the intense combat over Guadalcanal, who had repeatedly faced American fighters and returned. Their inability to protect the Admiral was not due to lack of skill or courage. It reflected broader systemic weaknesses in Japanese naval aviation doctrine, weaknesses that would only become evident under the extraordinary pressures of this mission. The critical question is not only what occurred, but why circumstances allowed it to occur. How could the Mitsubishi A6MIN-30, piloted by some of the Navy's most capable aviators, falter on a mission that should have been well within their operational capacity? The explanation lies in a complex interplay of aircraft limitations, outdated tactical doctrines, and misreadings of the evolving dynamics of aerial warfare by 1943. The mission followed closely on the heels of Operation I-Go, Admiral Yamamoto's final major offensive. Having traveled to congratulate units stationed at Lakunai Airfield on Rabaul, he had returned to the front lines. On April 17, 1943, the 204th Naval Air Group prepared for a routine morning briefing, but this session was anything but ordinary. 6 pilots were summoned for an exclusive operation, signaling that their assignment would diverge sharply from the daily patrols and emergency sorties that had dominated their combat experience. The selected aviators represented the finest talent available. Lieutenant Junior Grade Tishi Morisaki, a seasoned section leader with over 2 years of combat experience, would coordinate the formation. Petty Officer First Class Shoi Sugita, a decorated ace with around 30 confirmed kills, brought tactical sharpness and confidence. Chief Petty Officer Yoshimi Hidaka, another ace with 20 victories, had repeatedly demonstrated an ability to survive even the most brutal air engagements over Guadalcanal. Petty Officer First Class Kenji Yanaga, recognized for his precise gunnery with 8 confirmed kills, added further firepower to the team. Petty Officer First Class Toyomitsu Tsugujinu was valued for his steady temperament under pressure. Finally, Petty Officer Second Class Yasushi Okazaki, younger than his peers but battle-tested, rounded out the group. Together, these 6 men were expected to create an impenetrable protective umbrella for Admiral Yamamoto's aircraft. Yet, despite their individual skills and experience, a combination of technical constraints, misjudged tactical deployment, and the unpredictable dynamics of combat would prevent them from achieving this goal. The events of that morning would expose the limitations of even the most celebrated Japanese aircraft and pilots, providing a sobering lesson in the hazards of overconfidence, outdated doctrine, and the unforgiving nature of aerial warfare. Commander Tadashi Nakajima, leader of the 204th Air Group, conducts the briefing in person. The reason is immediately clear to the pilots assembled before him. At dawn the following day, 6 selected aviators will be entrusted with an assignment of extraordinary importance. They are to escort Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto during an official inspection flight to Bougainville. This is no routine protective detail. Yamamoto is far more than a senior naval officer. He is the principal strategist behind Japan's naval doctrine, the architect of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and arguably the only Japanese commander who fully grasps both the strengths and the severe industrial disadvantages Japan faces in a prolonged conflict with the United States. The pilots understand at once that this mission carries symbolic and strategic weight far beyond a normal escort operation. They are not merely guarding a passenger, they are safeguarding the mind directing Japan's war at sea. The Admiral's journey is intended as a morale-boosting tour. He plans to visit airfields at Balalai and Buin, congratulating aviators who have recently completed Operation Bingo. At Rabaul, ground crews and pilots prepare their aircraft with quiet discipline, unaware that events thousands of miles away have already sealed the fate of this mission. Roughly 1,600 miles to the east at Pearl Harbor, American intelligence officers have just achieved one of the most decisive intelligence breakthroughs of the Pacific War. On April 14, U.S. radio intercept stations capture a Japanese naval transmission identified as NT Phone 31755. The message is encrypted using the JN25D naval code, a system American cryptanalysts have been steadily penetrating since before the Battle of Midway. What emerges from the decryption shocks even seasoned intelligence veterans. The message, addressed to senior commanders including Base Unit No. 1, the 11th Air Flotilla and the 26th Air Flotilla, contains something almost unthinkable, a precise travel schedule for Admiral Yamamoto's inspection tour. The document lists departure times, arrival times, intermediate stops, and exact flight routes. At Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, analysts reconstruct Yamamoto's movements down to the minute. He's scheduled to depart Rabaul at 600 hours, land at Balalai airstrip at 800, then proceed by subchaser to Shortland Island at 840, arriving at 940. After lunch with senior officers, he will depart Shortland at 1400 and return to Rabaul by 1540. The implications are immediate and unmistakable. Japan's rigid adherence to punctuality and detailed planning has provided the enemy with a near-perfect targeting solution. What should have been a routine administrative message has instead become a roadmap for a potential decapitation strike. The gravity of the discovery demands the highest level of authorization. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz reviews the intelligence personally. After consultation with Washington, the decision is reached. The opportunity is too significant to ignore. Yamamoto must be intercepted and killed. At Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, preparations for what will be known as Operation Vengeance begin under harsh physical and mathematical constraints. The interception point near Bougainville lies approximately 420 miles away at the extreme operational range of the P-38 Lightning fighter. Reaching it will require auxiliary fuel tanks, flawless navigation, and absolute precision in timing. Major John Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron leads the planning effort. On the night of April 17, he and his staff work without rest, calculating fuel burn rates, prevailing winds, airspeeds, and the exact moment when Yamamoto's aircraft can be intercepted at low altitude. The margin for error is effectively zero. The final plan is bold and unforgiving. 18 P-38s are assigned, though mechanical failures during engine startup reduce the number to 16. These aircraft will fly a carefully engineered route designed to avoid Japanese radar coverage and coastal observers. The pilots will maintain strict radio silence and skim just above the ocean surface to remain undetected. The route is divided into 5 precisely timed segments. A single navigational error, an unexpected headwind, or a mechanical malfunction will doom the mission. The intercept is scheduled for 935 hours, leaving the Americans with no more than 15 minutes of combat time before fuel limitations force them to disengage and head back toward Guadalcanal. Meanwhile at Rabaul, 6 Japanese pilots ready their Mitsubishi A6M III Model 22 fighters. These aircraft represent the latest refinement of Japan's most famous fighter design. Yet by April 1943, refinement has failed to keep pace with the changing realities of air combat. When the Zero first appeared in 1940, it stunned Allied pilots. Its extraordinary range, exceptional maneuverability, and respectable firepower were achieved through an uncompromising obsession with weight reduction. Armor plating was eliminated. Self-sealing fuel tanks were deemed unnecessary. Structural strength was reduced to the bare minimum required for flight. The result was a carrier-based fighter that could outturn anything it faced and fly distances previously thought impossible. But what once made the Zero formidable now makes it fragile. The A6 Min 3 variant attempts modest improvements, a more powerful Ka-21 engine producing roughly 1,130 horsepower, improved high-altitude performance, and a slightly better dive capability. These changes, however, do not alter the core philosophy of the design. The aircraft still offers no protection for its pilot. Its fuel tanks remain vulnerable to ignition, and most critically, it lacks the speed necessary to either pursue or evade the new generation of American fighters. Against aircraft like the P-38 Lightning, the Zero's legendary agility can no longer compensate for its deficiencies. As dawn approaches, both sides prepare, one guided by honor, tradition, and routine, the other by mathematics, cryptography, and calculated risk. Neither yet knows that within hours, one of the most consequential aerial interceptions in military history is about to unfold. The Mitsubishi A6 M3 Model 22 is capable of reaching a top speed of 388 miles per hour at an altitude of 19,690 feet. By comparison, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, which is scheduled to intercept them the following day, can attain 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. The P-38 is structurally robust enough to perform steep dives without risk of airframe failure and is armed with sufficient firepower to destroy a single Zero fighter in one concentrated burst. The defensive strategy that the Japanese forces are expected to implement was originally designed during operations in China, where they faced adversaries of lesser capability, and does not adequately reflect the realities of aerial combat in 1943. Typically, Japanese fighter escorts are positioned above and behind the bombers they protect. This configuration is effective for intercepting attackers diving from higher altitudes, essentially the standard fighter attack tactic. However, this formation has a significant vulnerability. It leaves the bombers exposed to attacks approaching from below and slightly behind, precisely the vector the American pilots intend to exploit. On the day in question, the Zero fighters are to maintain an altitude around 6,500 feet, approximately 1,500 feet above the two Mitsubishi Gi-4M Betty bombers of the 7005th Air Group. Bomber 323 carries Admiral Yamamoto, while Bomber 326 transports Vice Admiral Mto Ugaki along with senior staff officers. The Japanese crews are trained to anticipate threats from above, yet they are oblivious to the impending danger approaching from below. As the formation nears Bougainville at 930 hours, the 6 Zero pilots maintain vigilant observation of the skies ahead and overhead, assuming that any hostile engagement will follow the traditional pattern, an attacker diving. Lieutenant Morisaki, commanding the escort, positions his aircraft precisely according to doctrine, maintaining spacing for mutual support while covering as much sky as possible. They are now flying over the dense jungle surrounding Bougainville, with the airfield at Baul in sight, mere minutes from landing. Despite nearing the end of the most perilous segment of their route, the real threat is approaching from an unexpected quarter. At 934 hours, Major Mitchell's top cover flight visually locates the Japanese formation exactly as predicted. 2 bombers flanked by 6 fighters in textbook alignment. The Americans' P-38 seconds, 16 aircraft strong, are advancing from the south at treetop level, completely concealed from the Japanese until the final moment. Mitchell transmits the first radio communication in over 2 hours, bogies 11 high. Captain Thomas Lanier, leading the intercepting flight, is struck by the precision and predictability of the Japanese approach. The P-38 seconds release their auxiliary fuel tanks and initiate the attack. What follows is executed at such speed that the sequence of events would remain a matter of debate among participants for decades. The Zero fighters scanning above and toward the distant horizon do not detect the P-38 seconds climbing from below until the Americans are already within effective firing range. The dark olive and grey paint scheme of the P-38 seconds, optimized for the Southwest Pacific Theater, allows them to blend almost seamlessly with the jungle terrain beneath. Only when Petty Officer Yanaga, positioned at the outer right flank of the formation, identifies the approaching aircraft does a warning reach the others. By that moment, Lieutenant Rex Barber is already within 50 yards of Yamamoto's bomber. Approaching from the vulnerable 7 o'clock position, directly below and behind the target where defensive guns cannot reach, Barber opens fire with his combined 0.50 caliber machine guns and 20mm cannon. The concentrated barrage immediately damages the bomber, tearing through the right engine, wing, and fuselage. In his after-action account, Barber recounts observing the right engine emit black smoke and white vapor as oil and fuel escape, followed by the visible disintegration of sections of the aircraft's skin. Adjusting his aim to the left engine, he continues his assault, watching as his rounds progressively compromise the integrity of the bomber. Inside the fuselage of the bomber, a single 150 caliber round finds its mark amid the hundreds of shots exchanged. It pierces the thin aluminum skin, striking Admiral Yamamoto in the left shoulder and continuing its path across his torso to exit beneath his right eye. The wound proves instantly fatal. The Japanese Zero pilots respond with reflexes honed in combat, but the outcome is already sealed. Lieutenant Morisaki executes an inverted roll and immediately initiates a split S maneuver, diving toward the pursuing P-38 seconds with his wingman in tow. Yet the altitude and positioning 1,500 feet above and behind the engagement make any effective interception impossible. The laws of physics, acceleration limits, and distance conspire against them. Even at maximum throttle, pushing their aircraft to structural limits, they cannot close the gap before the decisive strike has been delivered. On the right flank, Chief Petty Officer Hidaka attempts to intercept Barber's P-38 by banking sharply, but the American pilot, aware of his advantage, pulls away from the critically damaged bomber. The P-38's superior speed allows it to escape before the Zero fighters can engage. Meanwhile, the bomber carrying Yamamoto, fatally struck, descends toward the jungle with its right engine ablaze. Warrant Officer Tako Kotani struggles to maintain control, but with one engine destroyed and significant damage to control surfaces, the aircraft is doomed. At 938 hours, merely 4 minutes after the first sighting of the American fighters, the Betty crashes into the dense jungle canopy. The second bomber, carrying Vice Admiral Ugaki, attempts to flee toward the ocean. Lieutenant Besby Holmes intercepts it, inflicting severe damage that causes it to crash as well. Ugaki survives, though he suffers serious injuries and is rescued from the wreckage. Among the Japanese pilots, only Petty Officer First Class Kenji Yanaga achieves any form of offensive success. As the P-38 seconds disengage and head south toward Guadalcanal, Yanaga notices one lightning trailing behind the formation, smoke streaming from a damaged engine. This is Lieutenant Raymond Hines' aircraft, compromised either by defensive fire from the bombers or prior combat. Yanaga pursues the crippled lightning, closing to effective firing range and unleashing multiple bursts from his 20mm cannon. He sees his rounds strike the wing and fuselage, puncturing fuel tanks and sending streams of fuel into the air. Despite the damage, the American fighter continues on, its remaining engine carrying it towards safety. After several minutes, Yanaga is forced to break off the chase, now distant from Bougainville, running low on ammunition and wary that other P-38 seconds could return to protect the damaged fighter. He heads back to Bali Airfield, where the other 50 pilots have already landed. Their aircraft are intact, yet the mission is an unequivocal failure. Hines' P-38 will not reach Guadalcanal and is lost over the ocean, the sole American casualty of the engagement. Yet this isolated Japanese success does little to alter the strategic consequences. The Imperial Japanese Navy has lost one of its most vital leaders, killed despite the protection of 6 of the 204th Air Group's most skilled fighter pilots. The failure of the Zero escort on April 18, 1943, reflects more than just tactical errors. It underscores the technological gulf that had emerged by this point in the Pacific conflict. The Mitsubishi A6M0, a revolutionary fighter in 1940, was by 1943 increasingly outclassed by the latest American aircraft, operating at the edge of obsolescence in the face of superior speed, firepower, and durability. The very principles that initially made the Mitsubishi A6M0 a formidable fighter in the early stages of World War II, extreme weight reduction to maximize range and agility, eventually became liabilities as adversaries adapted to its vulnerabilities. The Zero was almost entirely unarmored, so even minor impacts from enemy fire could either kill or severely injure the pilot. Its fuel tanks lacked self-sealing capabilities, making the aircraft highly prone to catastrophic fires when hit by incendiary ammunition. By the time of Admiral Yamamoto's mission, these design shortcomings were particularly consequential. The Zero's top speed of only 388 miles per hour, combined with unstable handling at high velocity, left it incapable of either pursuing or evading the newer American fighters. The P-38 Lightning, powered by twin engines generating a total of 2,800 horsepower, more than double the output of the Zero's single 1,130 horsepower engine, could engage or disengage on its own terms. Japanese fighter escort strategies had been formulated during conflicts with Chinese aircraft in the late 1930s. At that time, positioning escort fighters above and slightly behind the bombers was effective, allowing pilots to retain energy advantage and maintain visual contact with their charges while defending against high-altitude diving attacks. However, by 1943, American aerial tactics had progressed significantly beyond such straightforward assaults. The introduction of the boom and zoom method allowed U.S. pilots to exploit superior speed, making swift, high-speed passes on enemy formations rather than engaging in prolonged turning dogfights. P-38 seconds could strike from below before the Zeros had time to react, then withdraw before the Japanese fighters could leverage their superior maneuverability. The Zero was ill-equipped to counter these hit-and-run attacks, lacking both the speed and acceleration to follow or escape effectively. Perhaps the most critical strategic misstep, however, was Japan's ignorance of the American success in breaking its naval codes. Detailed information about Yamamoto's flight, sent 4 days in advance, was essentially delivered directly into U.S. hands. Japanese leadership's absolute confidence in the inviolability of their communication security meant they never suspected that sensitive operational plans were already exposed to enemy intelligence. This combination of tactical obsolescence and intelligence failures left the Zero and its pilots dangerously outmatched during the mission. The overconfidence of Japanese planners was starkly evident in the arrangements for Admiral Yamamoto's flight. No precautionary diversions were planned, no alterations to the route were considered at the last moment, and no enhanced security measures were implemented even though the Navy's top commander was traversing a combat zone only 2 days after the conclusion of Operation Owego. Upon landing at Balal Airfield, the 6 pilots assigned to the mission were enveloped in a tense, almost suffocating silence. Immediate recriminations were absent. No one accused their peers of cowardice or incompetence. It was universally understood that they had fallen into a meticulously orchestrated ambush, one that relied on intelligence entirely beyond their foresight. Yet, the sense of personal and professional devastation was overwhelming. These pilots had been chosen for a task considered the pinnacle of honor, safeguarding Admiral Yamamoto, and they had not succeeded. Within the strict hierarchical framework of Japanese military culture, where disgrace and accountability are collective rather than personal, the 6 aviators recognized that a single misfortune had now defined their entire service careers. News of Yamamoto's death reached Rabaul with the impact of a sudden physical shock. The admiral was not merely a military figure, he symbolized the very might of the Imperial Japanese Navy. He was one of the few leaders capable of balancing Japan's aspirations with the pragmatic limits of its power. His demise constituted more than a tactical setback. It was a profound psychological blow. Morale, already weakened by prolonged attritional engagements in the Solomon Islands, plummeted further. The Japanese High Command swiftly classified all information regarding the incident as top secret. When the general public finally learned of the Admiral's passing on May 21, 1943, The official explanation was limited. He had died while overseeing operations at the front. A state funeral was held in Tokyo on June 5, 1943, reserved for the nation's most venerated heroes. Attendance included the emperor himself, and the ceremony was observed by the public with a moment of collective silence. For the 6 pilots at Rabaul, the funeral served as a stark, formal acknowledgement of the failure they had endured. Just 2 days following the funeral, on June 7, 1943, Japanese forces launched a significant air assault against American positions in the Solomon Islands, with particular focus on the Russell Islands. The operation deployed 81 Mitsubishi Zeros, 12 of which carried incendiary bombs, while the remainder provided fighter escort under the 204th Air Group. The engagement proved deadly. During the 90-minute confrontation, which saw 23 to 24 Japanese aircraft lost against roughly 50 Allied fighters, 2 of Yamamoto's escort pilots were killed. Chief Petty Officer Yoshimi Hidaka was among those shot down, underscoring the high cost of Japan's response in the wake of the admiral's death. Petty Officer Second Class Yasushi Okazaki lost his life during the same operation, joining the ranks of fallen pilots who pressed their attacks despite overwhelming odds. Both he and his fellow aviator piloted Mitsubishi Zeros equipped with incendiary bombs under their wings, navigating through dense anti-aircraft fire to strike at enemy positions. Their deaths foreshadowed a recurring theme among the escorts assigned to defend Admiral Yamamoto, a relentless pursuit of redemption through combat. Meanwhile, the experience of Petty Officer First Class Kenji Yanaga on June 7th unfolded differently. After executing a bombing run over Russell Island, his Zero was intercepted by 2 American 4F Wildcats during a climbing turn. Intense evasive maneuvers could not prevent a series of devastating hits. A .50 caliber bullet shattered his right hand as it clutched the control stick, leaving only the smallest finger intact, while another round ripped through his right leg, cutting major arteries and filling his boot with blood. Despite these critical injuries, Yanaga clung to consciousness and managed to maintain control of the crippled aircraft with his left hand alone. Battling severe shock and blood loss, he continuously shouted to keep himself awake, eventually guiding the aircraft back to the Japanese base at Mund. With his right hand incapacitated, he could not deploy the landing gear and was forced to execute a belly landing on the coral runway. Japanese Marines quickly extracted him from the cockpit and amputated the remnants of his right hand. Against all odds, he survived and was transported back to Japan, ending his active service while preserving his life. The attrition among Yamamoto's escorts continued. On June 16, 1943, Lieutenant Junior Grade Tishi Morisaki, the leader of the escort formation, was killed attacking Allied transport ships off Lunga Point, Guadalcanal, along with his squadron leader, Lieutenant Zenjiro Moano. Morisaki's death, occurring just 9 days after the losses of Hidaka and Okazaki, left only 2 of the original 6 escorts still operational. By July 1943, Petty Officer First Class Toyomitsu Tsujin went missing during a mission escorting dive bombers striking Allied positions at Renova Island. He never returned and his fate remained unknown. With Tsujin lost, only 1 member of the initial escort team remained in combat, Petty Officer First Class Shoichi Sugita. Sugita, who had already been credited with roughly 30 aerial victories by the time of Yamamoto's death, chose a different approach to atonement. Unlike his comrades, who seemed drawn toward a swift, heroic death, he believed that the most meaningful form of redemption was through continued combat success. Over the summer of 1943, Sugita steadily increased his tally, engaging in numerous dogfights over the Solomon Islands. By August, his victory count reached approximately 40, making him the top-scoring ace in the campaign. However, in August 1943, Sugita faced a near-fatal encounter. While attacking enemy bombers, his Zero was struck in the engine by American fighters and caught fire. In a move that many of his peers would have regarded as dishonorable, he abandoned the aircraft, parachuting into territory held by Japanese forces while suffering serious burns. Following medical treatment, he was evacuated to Japan for recovery, temporarily removing him from active operations. After a 7-month convalescence, Sugita returned to combat in March 1944 as a petty officer second class with the 263rd Air Group stationed in Guam. In his absence, the Pacific theater had changed dramatically. U.S. forces had secured the Marshall Islands, neutralized strategic positions in Truk, and were preparing assaults on the Marianas. In June 1944, his unit merged with the 2001st Air Group in the Philippines, which was reorganized under Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi as the first official kamikaze formation. Sugita refused to participate in these suicide missions and was subsequently ordered back to Japan, choosing survival and further service over immediate self-sacrifice. In June 1944, Sugar took part in what would later be known by the Americans as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the aerial engagement forming part of the larger Battle of the Philippine Sea. On June 19, the Imperial Japanese Navy mounted its most extensive carrier-based strike since the disaster at Midway, committing hundreds of aircraft to battle. The outcome was devastating. U.S. fighters and naval anti-aircraft fire obliterated more than 300 Japanese planes. Suga survived, despite his squadron, the 263rd Air Group, being almost entirely destroyed. As part of a small group attempting to retreat toward Guam, only 6 aircraft remained, but U.S. Air 6F Hellcats intercepted them, immediately downing 5. Suga's Zero fighter, heavily damaged and with critical navigation systems destroyed, somehow managed to reach a Japanese airfield on Rota. He emerged as the lone survivor of his unit. By January 1945, Suga had been promoted to Chief Petty Officer and assigned to the elite 3001st Fighter Squadron within the 343rd Naval Air Group, based at Kanoya Air Base in Kyushu. By that point, he had been officially credited with 70 aerial victories. On April 15, 1945, nearly 2 years after Admiral Yamamoto's death, American carrier planes launched an attack on Kanoya. 5 of 6 Hellcats from USS Independence and USS Randolph struck the 343rd during takeoff. Suga, piloting a Kawanishi Nung K2J Shiden Kai, was hit the moment he left the runway. His aircraft crashed beyond the airstrip, killing him instantly at the age of 20. Though he had outlived all other pilots assigned to Yamamoto's escort, he never attained the personal redemption he had hoped for. Meanwhile in Japan, Kenji Yanaga was recovering from wounds sustained on June 7, 1943. The loss of his right hand ended any chance of returning to combat. Promoted to warrant officer, he was stationed at Kasumigura Naval Air Station as an instructor, where he spent the remainder of the war training new pilots. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, Yanaga was among roughly 5,000 surviving naval aviators from a total of over 25,000 who had served during the conflict. After the war, Yanaga resettled in Tokyo and found employment with a modest trading company. For nearly 30 years, he kept silent about his involvement in the Yamamoto mission. The weight of being the only surviving escort pilot was a private burden, a shame he could not confide to anyone. In the mid-1970s, Japanese aviation historian Akira Yoshimura, while researching a book on the Yamamoto operation, uncovered evidence suggesting that a single escort pilot had survived. Yoshimura eventually located Yanaga, now in his 50s, and conducted multiple interviews. Through these conversations, Yanaga recounted the mission in detail for the first time, the intense pride of selection, the formation over Bougainville, the overwhelming swiftness and precision of the American attack, and the near impossibility of the task they had faced. He described how the P-38 fighters struck from an unforeseen direction at a critical moment, how the Zero escort had been deployed according to tactical doctrine that proved insufficient, and how the Americans' superior speed and timing left the Japanese pilots virtually defenseless. He stressed that protecting 2 bombers from 16 P-38 seconds with only 6 Zeros was a mission doomed from the start. In April 1988, the National Museum of the Pacific War and the Admiral Nimitz Museum in Fredericksburg, Texas, held a symposium marking the 45th anniversary of Operation Vengeance. 8 surviving American pilots attended, and through Japanese contacts, they invited Yanaga to join them. At 68 years old, he made his first visit to the United States. contemporary reports noted that Yamamoto was the only Japanese participant at the event. During the symposium, he met mission leader John Mitchell and presented him with a small handheld compass. He shook hands with Rex Barber and the other pilots, and his account was formally recorded as part of an oral history on April 15, 1988, now preserved in the Texas History Archives. Video records capture him participating in panel discussions alongside American pilots such as Frank Holmes, Louis Kay, Jack Jacobson, Douglas Canning, and Roger Ames. Yamamoto lived for another 2 decades, during which he continued giving interviews and appearing in documentaries. He consistently maintained that the failure to prevent Yamamoto's death had been unavoidable given the circumstances, the obsolescence of the aircraft, outdated tactical doctrines, and an adversary that knew precisely when and where to strike. On February 29, 2008, Kenji Yamamoto passed away at the age of 88, marking the end of the life of the last surviving witness to one of the most pivotal moments of World War II. The inability to safeguard Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto on April 18, 1943, stemmed largely from technological shortcomings and intelligence lapses rather than a lack of bravery or skill among the pilots. By that point, the Mitsubishi A6M0, once revolutionary in 1940, had become increasingly outdated. Its thin airframe, absence of self-sealing fuel tanks, and insufficient speed rendered it ineffective against emerging American aerial tactics. The P-38 Lightning, in contrast, possessed the ability to dictate the terms of engagement. With superior speed and climb performance, the Lightning could strike and withdraw at will, neutralizing the Zero's famed maneuverability. The A6M3 Model 22 could reach a top speed of 388 miles per hour at nearly 20,000 feet, while the P-38 could push 414 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Twin Allison engines provided the Lightning with between 2,800 and 3,450 combined horsepower, far surpassing the Zero's single 1,130 horsepower engine. In addition, the P-38's climb rate exceeded the Zero by 1,650 feet per minute, and its turbocharged engines maintained superior performance at high altitudes, giving American pilots a decisive advantage. Equally critical was the intelligence breakthrough achieved by U.S. cryptographers in breaking the Japanese JN-25D naval code. The decrypted messages included Yamamoto's detailed travel schedule, providing American forces with precise timing and locations for interception. Japanese overconfidence in their communication security amplified the impact of this intelligence. Standard operational precautions were ignored, and the Navy's leadership could not fathom that their codes were compromised even after the Admiral's death. Some officers suspected that the Americans might have prior knowledge, but the top command dismissed the idea entirely. This denial allowed USS codebreakers to continue monitoring Japanese communications for months. Tactical miscalculations compounded the problem. The Japanese escort fighters followed deployment patterns optimized against weaker opponents in the late 1930 seconds, assuming any attacks would come from above. Their formations prevented mutual support, and the vertical separation between units limited the possibility of rapid intervention. On the day of Yamamoto's interception, 6 Zero pilots were organized into 2 V-shaped formations of 3 planes each, flying roughly 1,500 feet above and behind the 2 Betty bombers they were tasked to protect. Japanese fighter doctrine emphasized individual skill rather than coordinated teamwork. Pilots relied on superior flying ability to achieve success, unlike their American counterparts, who trained rigorously in mutual support maneuvers such as the Thack Weave. This doctrine remained effective only as long as Japanese pilots had both superior aircraft and combat experience. By 1943, however, American pilots had become highly skilled and were flying technologically advanced fighters. For the 6 Zero pilots involved in Yamamoto's escort, the events of April 18 left an indelible mark on the remainder of their lives. Within 3 months, 4 had died: Hidaka and Okazaki on June 7, Morisaki on June 16, and Suginu went missing on July 1. Shoji Sugita survived until April 15, 1945, accumulating 70 confirmed aerial victories before dying in a scramble takeoff at Kanoya. Only Kenji Yamamoto outlived the war, carrying the weight of that mission's failure until his death in 2008. The combination of outdated technology, superior enemy tactics, and compromised intelligence turned what could have been a routine escort mission into a defining tragedy. The Zero, once a symbol of Japanese air supremacy, was unable to contend with the evolving realities of aerial warfare, while American codebreakers and pilots leveraged every advantage to execute a precise and fatal interception. The 204th Air Group, which supplied all 6 of the escorts assigned to Admiral Yamamoto, endured heavy casualties throughout 1943. This unit had come into existence on November 1, 1942 through the reorganization of the 6th Air Group, and it was stationed at Rabaul during the Solomon Islands campaign. By the end of the war, only a handful of its original pilots remained alive. The death of Admiral Yamamoto inflicted a profound psychological blow on Japan, one from which the Imperial Navy never fully recovered. Yamamoto was not just a commander of fleets, he was the strategic mind behind Japan's naval doctrine. His acute grasp of American industrial power, his prescient warnings about a drawn-out conflict, and his capacity to plan operations of unprecedented scope, such as the attack on Pearl Harbor, rendered him irreplaceable. His successor, Admiral Minichi Koga, lacked both Yamamoto's insight and his commanding presence. For the United States, the operation that killed Yamamoto was more than a tactical success. It confirmed the reach and sophistication of American intelligence and showcased their growing ability to carry out precise, long-range missions. Operation Vengeance initially assigned 18 P-38 Lightning fighters, but only 16 ultimately participated, as 2 aircraft experienced mechanical failures during takeoff. The inability of the Japanese to shield Yamamoto was not a reflection of the 6 escort pilots' skill or bravery. It was a failure of the Japanese military system as a whole by 1943. It marked a turning point where individual courage and expertise could no longer offset the disparity in technology and intelligence. The Zero pilots followed the procedures they had been trained in, yet their doctrine and aircraft were fundamentally inadequate. Could a different formation or positioning have saved Yamamoto? Realistically, the answer is almost certainly no. Even if the Japanese had spotted the P-38 a few seconds sooner, or if they had been at a lower altitude, the superior speed and firepower of the American fighters would still have dictated the outcome. The P-38 required only moments to destroy the lightly armored Betty bombers, while the Zeros could have inflicted heavier casualties. Preventing Yamamoto's death was beyond their capability. In this sense, the mission's outcome reflects not a single failed engagement, but the broader decline of Japan's position in the Pacific War. It underscores how technological superiority, intelligence advantage, and tactical innovation can overwhelm traditional military virtues such as bravery, skill, and dedication. Admiral Yamamoto was en route to commend the units involved in Operation IGO when American intelligence, having deciphered the JN-25D code, intercepted his exact flight schedule. The precision of the U.S. Mission 16 P-38 flying 420 miles in complete radio silence to strike precisely at 935 hours demonstrates the remarkable evolution of American operational capabilities by 1943. The wreckage of Betty Bomber No. 323 still lies in the jungles of Bougainville, serving as a silent memorial to Yamamoto and his staff. The 6 Zero pilots who failed to intercept him are remembered largely through the testimony of Kenji Yanaga. Their inability to protect Yamamoto encapsulates the tragedy of the Imperial Japanese Navy during the Pacific War. Skilled, disciplined warriors undone by technological inferiority, outdated doctrine, and intelligence failures. Yanaga passed away on February 29, 2008, at the age of 88, leaving the story of Yamamoto's escort as a chapter of history rather than living memory. Yet the lessons endure: the peril of over-reliance on obsolete technology, the critical need for intelligence security, the importance of evolving military doctrine, and the sobering limits of human courage when confronted by systemic disadvantages. The 6 Zero pilots of April 18, 1943 were not deficient. They were entrusted with an impossible task, flying aircraft that had been surpassed by their adversaries, adhering to a doctrine no longer suited to the realities of modern air combat, and confronting an enemy who knew precisely when and where to strike. Their story remains one of the Pacific War's most poignant narratives, a testament to warriors undone not by their own failings, but by the relentless transformation of warfare itself.